The dispatcher called me at 4:47 in the morning to say the highway was closed and the rest of my run was getting reassigned. 18 years driving long haul, and I'd never once come home ahead of schedule. That Tuesday in November, I did. I didn't call ahead. Figured I'd surprise my son, maybe take him to breakfast before school. He'd just turned 10 in September, and lately our calls have been getting shorter. He'd run out of things to say to a voice on a phone. I understood that. I'd been gone a lot. The house looked the same from the outside, porch lights still on even though it was past dawn. My second wife's car in the driveway, which was normal. She worked from home most days. I'd been on the road since mid-August, 3 weeks out, 4 days back, 3 weeks out again. That was the rhythm we'd built. Or tried to. I let myself in with my key and the smell hit me first. Coffee, but old coffee. The kind that'd been sitting on a burner since the night before. Everything was clean, almost aggressively so. The kind of clean that makes a house feel like a showroom. I called out. Nobody answered. I went upstairs and knocked on my son's door. Nothing. I pushed it open. The bed was made. Not the way a 10-year-old makes a bed, which usually involves pulling the comforter up halfway and calling it done. This was tucked, cornered, flat. His Lego sets were in a box against the wall. His drawings were gone from the corkboard above his desk. Just the tacks left, still in the cork. Little red dots in a grid where his artwork used to hang. My son had covered every surface in that room with drawings since he could hold a pencil. My phone buzzed, my wife's name on the screen. Her voice was careful. Where are you? Home. Where's my son? A pause. He's at a program. Through the church. It's a leadership retreat. Outdoor education, that kind of thing. Since when? She said something about me not reading the messages she'd sent. She said I was always unreachable. She said he needed structure and direction and things. She implied I wasn't providing because I was gone all the time, which was fair and also not fair, and also completely beside the point. How long has he been there? Almost 3 weeks. I asked for the address. She said I'd embarrass him. She said these programs didn't allow drop-ins for a reason. She said he was thriving. Give me the address. When she finally did, I was already pulling my duffel bag out of the front closet and looking for my truck keys. The place was called Cornerstone Youth Initiative. The address was in Plumas County, about 2 hours north and east, through mountain roads that got narrower the longer I drove. My GPS signal cut out twice. I followed the directions I'd written on a gas station receipt. It was a compound, but they wouldn't have called it that. 2 main buildings and several smaller structures arranged around a central clearing. Chain-link fencing along the property line. A hand-painted sign at the entrance that said, Cornerstone Youth Initiative. Building tomorrow's leaders. There were no kids visible. I parked and walked toward the main building. Locked. I knocked and nobody answered. I went around the side and followed a dirt path toward what looked like agricultural land behind the structures. There was a greenhouse, and past that, rows of raised garden beds, and past that, rows of raised garden beds, and past those, something larger. That's where the children were. I counted 16 of them, maybe 17. They were working a commercial mushroom operation, the kind that uses long plastic bags of substrate stacked on industrial shelving inside a low metal building with the sides rolled up. It was cold. Mid-November in the Sierras. The kids wore thin cotton gloves and had harvest bags slung over their shoulders. The youngest one I could see couldn't have been more than 8. My son was near the back row. I recognized him by the hoodie, the faded blue one with the fraying cuff on the left sleeve that he refused to let me throw away because it had been his mother's favorite color. His first mother. She died when he was 5. Ovarian cancer. We'd had 3 years of almost normal before I met my second wife, before I convinced myself that what my son needed was a family structure and not just a grieving father who drove trucks for a living. He was moving slowly down the row, checking bags, pulling clusters of mushrooms and dropping them into the harvest bag. His hands looked raw. His face was turned away. I went in. A man in a green vest stepped into my path. Sir, this area is for program participants only. That's my son. I called my son's name. He turned around. He looked at me the way you look at something you're not sure is real. Then his face did something I'd never seen it do before. This complicated thing that was relief and fear and exhaustion all at once. And then he was just crying, standing there in the mushroom shed with his harvest bag still over his shoulder, crying the way he hadn't since the week his mother died. I crossed the row in about 4 steps and picked him up. He was lighter than he should have been. Dad. He was gripping the back of my jacket with both hands. Dad, they said you told them to keep me here. They said you didn't want me home until I learned how to be useful. I'm here. I've got you. I'm here. She said you signed the papers. She said you wanted me to do the program so I'd stop being a burden. Behind me I heard the man in the green vest talking into a radio. I heard him say, "There's a situation." Some of the other kids had stopped working. They were watching us. A few of them looked like they recognized something in what was happening. Like they'd thought about it and set it aside a long time ago. I walked toward the exit with my son still in my arms. The man in the green vest followed, telling me about program agreements and legal guardianship and how I was interfering with a structured educational curriculum. A girl near the door, probably 12 or 13, said quietly to nobody in particular, "Is his dad really here?" Outside, a heavy-set man in a fleece vest with a Cornerstone logo was walking toward me from the main building. His name turned out to be Hargrove. He had the practiced warmth of someone who spent a lot of time reassuring adults about things they should have been concerned about. "Mr. Briggs, I understand you're surprised. We do ask the parents coordinate visits through our office. It's about continuity for the kids. My son's name is Eli. He's been here 3 weeks. He thinks I sent him here because he was a burden." Hargrove's expression shifted slightly, smoothed over. There are sometimes communication gaps between what parents intend and how children interpret. How old is the youngest child in that shed? He's not a shed. It's a learning environment. We teach sustainable agriculture, entrepreneurship, life skills. How old? Hargrove shifted his weight. All of our participants are here with full parental authorization. Your wife signed a program agreement that grants us temporary educational guardianship. My wife isn't his mother. I understand a family dynamic is complex. Give me the paperwork, right now. My phone had 2 bars. I called my wife. She answered on the second ring, her voice too controlled, which meant she'd been expecting this. She said she'd done her research. She said Hargrove had been running the program for years. She said Eli had behavioral issues at school, that he was falling behind, that the structure would be good for him, that I was never home enough to see how hard it had gotten. He thinks I abandoned him. That's not. He told me to my face. He said you told him I signed papers agreeing to this. A silence. Then I may have simplified the explanation so he'd cooperate with the transition. I hung up. Hargrove was still standing there when I turned back to him. He'd put on a different expression now, something quieter and more careful. "I'm leaving with my son. If you try to stop me, I will call every agency I can name before I reach the end of your driveway." He said it would constitute interference with a legal program agreement. He said I could be charged. He said Eli would be confused and destabilized by an abrupt removal. My son had his face against my shoulder and hadn't let go of my jacket since I picked him up. I walked toward my truck. 2 men appeared from around the side of the main building. One of them positioned himself between me and the parking area. I'm a big man. 18 years of loading and unloading and climbing in and out of rigs will do that. I'm not proud of the next 60 seconds. I'm not embarrassed either. I was almost at my truck when a county sheriff's vehicle turned into the property entrance. The deputy who got out was a woman, maybe 40, with a particular expression of someone who'd been called to enough family disputes to wait before deciding who was right. She looked at me, at my son, at the 2 men who'd positioned themselves nearby, at Hargrove. She said, "What's going on here?" Hargrove spoke first. He called it a custody dispute, said I'd shown up without notice, said his staff had tried to de-escalate. He had a folder in his hand before she'd finished asking the question. I said, "My son is 10 years old and he's been harvesting mushrooms in a cold shed since before Thanksgiving. Look at his hands." The deputy looked at my son's hands. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, To Hargrove, "I'm going to need to see the facility." Hargrove said she'd need a warrant for a full inspection. She said she had probable cause based on observable conditions, and she wasn't asking. What followed took most of the day. A second unit arrived, then a social worker from the county. Hargrove kept offering coffee and binders full of program documentation. Two of his staff members tried to move a vehicle and block the access road, which did not help their situation. In the main building, in a room that had been converted from what looked like a dining hall, there were 17 cots. The kids slept there, 4 to 5 hours a night, according to the records they eventually found. Wake up at 5. Morning chores. Work shifts from 7 to noon, and again from 2 to 6. Evening programming, which was a series of lectures about discipline, self-worth earned through labor, and the moral failings of comfort-seeking. Kids who asked to call their parents were told the calls would destabilize their progress. Kids who cried or refused to work were put in a cool-down room, which was a converted storage closet, no window, a cot, a Bible. Ellie had been in the cool-down room once. He'd asked why his dad hadn't called. I sat with him in my truck while the investigation unfolded. A paramedic checked him over. Mild malnutrition, borderline hypothermia risk, lacerations on both hands from harvest work, a respiratory thing starting in his chest that they said would need antibiotics. "He needs to be seen at a hospital," the paramedic said. "I'm not leaving my dad," my son said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken since we'd left the shed. "I'll follow you the whole way," I told him. "I won't be out of your sight." We drove to the hospital in tandem. I stayed in his room. He fell asleep around 9 that night, still holding my hand, and I sat in the chair next to his bed and thought about every decision I'd made in the last 3 years. My second wife was arrested around 10 p.m. at our house. The program agreement she'd signed had language in it that she may not have fully understood, or that she'd understood and told herself meant something different. Either way, it granted Cornerstone temporary guardianship with provisions that effectively cut off my parental access without my knowledge. She'd signed it, and she'd recruited 2 other parents in our neighborhood to send their kids. She'd had a difficult childhood. That came up later in the proceedings. A controlling stepfather, a school that had failed her, a deep and genuine belief that the kind of structured hardship she'd survived had built her character. She wasn't cynical about it. She'd believed in Hargrove's program the way some people believe in something that hurt them, because it's easier than admitting the hurt was just hurt. It didn't make what she'd done right, but it made it make a kind of terrible sense. Hargrove and 3 of his senior staff were arrested before the week was out. Federal charges: labor trafficking of minors, fraud, child endangerment, operating an unlicensed residential facility. The state investigation revealed he'd been running variations of the program for 11 years, cycling through different counties, different non-profit registrations, different names. He had 6 prior complaints filed with various agencies, none of which had resulted in action. The revenue from the mushroom operation alone had grossed over $400,000 the previous year. None of it went to the kids. 23 children total across 2 locations. My wife got 22 years. She had a good lawyer who argued reduced culpability based on documented childhood trauma and genuine belief in the program's merits. I testified at her sentencing. I told the court what I thought, which was that she had caused my son real harm, that she had deceived me, and that whatever her reasons were, they weren't sufficient. Then I sat down. Hargrove got 38 years, no parole. I quit long haul after the trial. Took a job driving for a regional carrier, shorter routes, home every night. We moved to a smaller place in a different part of town, just the 2 of us, Eli and me. The first month, he didn't draw. His sketchbooks were still packed in a box from the move, and he didn't ask for them. He watched a lot of television. He slept a lot. His therapist said that was okay, that the nervous system needed to downshift before it could do anything else. 6 weeks in, I found him at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning with a pencil and a blank piece of paper. He was drawing the mushroom shed. Just the outline of it, the roll-up sides, the shelving inside. I sat down across from him. He kept drawing. "I don't know why I'm drawing it," he said. "Maybe because it's real," I said. "And drawing it is a way of saying it happened, and you're still here." He thought about that. He drew for another 20 minutes. Then he put the pencil down and said he wanted eggs. We had eggs. Over the next year, Eli drew a lot. He drew the shed in different weather conditions, in different lights. He drew the other kids he'd been there with. He drew a boy named Felix, age 9, who'd been at Cornerstone longer than anyone, and who'd stopped talking by the time the investigation found him. He drew a girl whose name he didn't know who'd given him half her sandwich one afternoon when the work ran long and dinner got pushed back. Felix's family had been told Felix was in an extended residential program by choice, that he was choosing not to call. Felix had not been choosing anything. He went home to his parents in January, and his mother posted something on the community Facebook group that I read about 7 times. She wrote, "My son is home. He is quiet, and he is thin, and he is ours again. Thank you to everyone who helped bring him back." Ili's therapist said drawing was how he processed, that the images were a way of organizing experiences that language couldn't quite hold. She said he had good instincts about his own healing, which I took as the best thing a therapist had ever said to me, because I hadn't given him many advantages, and I was glad he'd developed that one on his own. 2 years after the trial, I started volunteering with a non-profit that worked on trafficking awareness in rural communities, agricultural and labor trafficking specifically, which gets less attention than other forms and happens more than people want to believe. We went to schools, churches, community centers. We gave parents a list of questions to ask before they enrolled their kids in anything. Can I visit without an appointment? Can my child call me whenever they want? What happens if they're unhappy? What is the complaint process? We told them that any program that discouraged parent contact was a program to avoid, that legitimate programs welcomed oversight, that the language of discipline and character building had been used to cover a lot of harm, and that if something felt wrong, they should say so out loud even if they felt embarrassed. I told them about Eli with his permission. He'd written it down in one of his notebooks, 3 pages in handwriting that was still a little unsteady from the hand injuries. The last part said, "I thought my dad had sent me there on purpose." That was the worst part. Not the work, not the cold, not the room they locked me in. The worst part was thinking my dad knew and didn't care. When he walked in and I saw his face, I knew he didn't know. That was the moment I started to get better. I've read those 3 pages more times than I can count. On the 2nd anniversary of the day I drove up that gravel road, Eli and I went back to Plumas County. The Cornerstone property had been seized and the buildings were in the process of being demolished. There was a work crew there. We watched from the road. Eli had his sketchbook. He drew the buildings coming down. "This is good," he said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Do you think Felix talks now?" "I don't know. I think he's working on it. I want to have a thing someday. Like a reunion. For all of us who were there. That's a good idea." He nodded. He kept drawing. When he finished, he held it up. The sketch showed the main building mid-demolition, a wall partially down, the sky visible through the gap. He'd drawn sunlight coming through. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the passenger seat. He was 12 by then, almost too old to fall asleep in a car, but he still did sometimes on long drives. I kept the radio off. I thought about the deputy who'd walked onto that property and not waited for a warrant. About the social worker who'd stayed until midnight making sure every child was placed somewhere safe. About Felix's mother and her Facebook post. About all the people in a chain of decisions that had to go right and how many of them almost didn't. I'd come home because a highway was closed. That was it. A jackknifed semi on I-80 had blocked 2 lanes. The dispatcher had rerouted, and I'd ended up at my own front door at 5 in the morning instead of rolling into a truck stop outside Reno. If that truck hadn't jackknifed, Eli would have been there until December. I try not to think about that too much. I try to think about the deputy instead, about how she looked at my son's hands and didn't need to hear anything else. Ilya's 13 now. He's in a program at his school for students with strong visual arts aptitude. Real program. I visited 3 times. They know me by name. His teacher shows me his work on a regular basis and explains what he's developing technically. Last month, she said he had an unusual ability to render emotion through structural elements, which I understood to mean he was good at saying things without saying them. He still draws the shed sometimes, less often than he used to. Last week he showed me a new one, same building, but this time he'd drawn it small, in the lower left corner. The rest of the page was something else, our kitchen table. His sketchbook stacked on it, a window with light coming through. Home, he said when I looked at it. That's what home looks like when you remember what it means. I asked if I could keep it. He said yeah, but he wanted to make a copy first. He's keeping the copy in his portfolio. He says someday he wants people to see the whole series, from the first drawing he made of the shed to that one, so they can see the distance. That's what I hold on to. Not the trial, not the sentencing, not the depositions or the media coverage or any of the mechanics of how justice worked. Just the distance. The space between who my son was in that mushroom shed and who he is now, drawing light through a kitchen window. He shouldn't have had to travel that distance. But he did, and he knows where he is now, and some mornings when I drop him off at school and watch him walk through those doors with his portfolio bag over his shoulder, I think, there he is. There is the person who survived something and kept going. That's enough. That's everything. I think about the jackknifed semi on I-80 more than is probably healthy. One truck driver made a bad turn on a November morning, blocked 2 lanes, and my dispatcher rerouted me home. That's the whole chain. That's the thing that saved my son. What I've come to understand is that outcomes like that don't actually hinge on luck alone. They hinge on what a person does when they get the unexpected opening. I came home early and I felt something was wrong and I didn't talk myself out of it. That matters. A lot of people get the opening and don't walk through it because they don't want to seem overprotective, or they trust the wrong authority, or they're tired. I was tired too. I walked through it anyway. Hargrove's operation worked because he understood something about people, that desperate parents want to believe someone else has the answers. He used the language of character and discipline and growth, and those are real things that real children need, so the words landed soft. What he was actually doing was exploiting the gap between what parents hoped for and what they were willing to verify. He counted on people not asking the next question. My wife didn't ask the next question. I should have been asking questions long before I came home. That's the part I sit with. Not Hargrove. Him I understand. He was a predator who built a system to profit off children, and he'll spend the next 4 decades in federal prison where he belongs. What I sit with is my own role in the conditions that made it possible. I was gone too much. I told myself the paycheck was the best thing I could give my son. I outsourced the daily work of knowing him to someone I hadn't known long enough to trust completely. Those were my choices, and they had consequences. And pretending otherwise would be a way of not learning anything. Ellie is the one who actually teaches me what resilience looks like up close. Not the word, not the concept. The actual daily practice of it. He drew the shed that hurt him. He drew it again and again until it got smaller on the page. He asked about Felix not because dwelling on it felt good, but because caring about other people was how he kept his own humanity intact through something that could have taken it. That's not something I taught him. That's something he figured out on his own in circumstances I failed to prevent, and the fact that he figured it out is the best thing I know about him. What I've tried to pass forward in the work I do with parents now is simpler than any philosophy. It's just this: knowing your child is not the same as loving your child. You can love them completely and still not know what's happening to them. Knowledge takes presence. It takes asking specific questions and listening to the specific answers. It takes noticing when the colored pencils are too neat and the sketchbook is missing. It takes trusting the part of yourself that says something is wrong even when every official-looking document says otherwise. Illy drew a picture last spring. Our kitchen table, his sketchbooks, light through the window. He called it home. He said he wanted people to see the distance between that drawing and the first one he made of the shed, so they could understand what the journey looked like. That distance is real. He earned every inch of it, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure he never has to travel it alone again.